Welcome, folks. This is Script Camp's new class on revision and rewriting called How to Fix Your Script. My name's Connor. I'll be leading this one. I am the instructor of the boot camps, which are going. New ones are starting right now that take place on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. We have TV writing, novel writing, and feature writing in those 3 time slots. We'll tell you more about those in just a second. So first thing, we're on a stage channel, so if you'd like to speak, use that hand raise icon to request to speak. Normally we'll just be checking the text chat, and if you're on one of our other platforms like YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, I recommend you come join us on Discord. So head to our website, scriptcamp.net, and you can get that link to join our Discord community and participate in our live interactive class today. So Script Camp is one of just many servers in Skill Camp, which is our company, our nonprofit, which offers free and low-cost classes to help you learn new skills to reach your life goals. Script Camp is our first and biggest one with more than 3,000 members, but we are adding new classes, new content in the other servers all the time. So check out WordCamp, which is our second biggest server for novel classes that are once a week for the boot camps, and we're adding more soon in the next few weeks. We have Code Camp, where we've had coding classes, Film Camp, and Creator Camp, where we've had classes in things like lighting and cameras, filmmaking techniques. Here's a bunch of just the upcoming free classes just on Script Camp. We have week 1 of our feature boot camp. That's going to be Sunday, May 7th, so that's in 3 days, from 10 to noon Pacific time. That is going to be our free overview class of the entire upcoming feature boot camp course. And if you came to the week 0 class, then you'll be able to push your idea even further along and continue working towards that, writing that feature in 8 weeks. We have a sci-fi class. It's going to be that same day, Sunday at 1 p.m., so after the feature class is done. A copyright class later the same day at 5, so 3 classes this upcoming Sunday. We have a class in Writing Better Dialogue that's going to be May 11th, next Thursday at 6. How to Fix Your Scene, so Scene Revision Workshop, Sunday, May 14th at 1. And then our last free class in this new lineup is Writing Monsters and Villains, for all you horror, thriller, fantasy fans out there that like, your chupacabras and your ring wraiths and your ghosts and your ghouls. That's going to be Sunday, May 14th at 5 p.m. We'll also have new fiction classes coming out on WordCamp in late May to June. New boot camps, here's the slots for when they take place. The time slot for Pilot right now is Fridays at 6. That started April 28th. So we've had a couple of those classes. You can always join a class that's in progress, but you're just more likely to be able to finish that script in time. Following along with the milestones of the course if you join it from the beginning or not later than the second week, I usually recommend. New novel boot camp will be starting in June. Currently, we're more than halfway through writing that complete novel in just 90 days. And we have a new feature boot camp that's going to be, is starting in just a couple days. We had our week 0 class to sort of prep everyone and get that initial feedback on loglines. But that will be running from Sundays from 11 to 1 throughout May. All right, so I won't go way too into me, but I am a working screenwriter since 2017. Not working right now, obviously, due to the strike that everyone knows about, but I am running the boot camps and the weekly writers lab on Saturdays, where you can come with up to 5 pages of anything you're working on or questions and topics that you'd like to hear more about. It's like office hours, basically. So Sunday feature boot camp, Nacho's telling us, has been changed from 10 to noon instead of 11 to 1. Thank you, Nacho. So if you would like to join, head over to scriptcamp.net. You can get the class on its own at scriptcamp.net/classes, or you can sign up for that free trial for our unlimited membership, which includes access to every server, every class, every event, Writers Lab, every boot camp, Advanced Lab, over 70 hours of live classes a month, more like over 100 hours at this point, access to recordings of all of our previous classes in the video library, and huge discounts off consultations, proofreads, and editing. This also comes with script coins, which you can use on things like table reads or merchandise. So check that out, scriptcamp.net. Sign up for your 2-week free trial. And if you've not yet signed up but you plan to, there will be a poll in the chat, which you can again find by mousing over the classroom channel and clicking that small white word bubble that says Open Chat. You will be able to vote in our poll to indicate if you plan to sign up but have not yet done so. And if by clicking yes, you will get instant access to all of the member-exclusive chat channels. Okay, so Nacho should be posting that shortly. In the chat, it'll look like a series of blue numbers that you can click on the appropriate option to vote in that. All right, so I think I've gone over this. Yeah, you'll have up to 90% off some of these story development, consultation, or editing sessions that you can check out at scriptcamp.net/coverage by just being a member. So by being a member, you will save so much that you can be getting premise and logline consults for $19 and other options like that. So check that out on the website. Okay. So I guess we might as well start with some sort of little discussion. I'm not going to bring anyone up for a voice at the moment, but feel free in the chat, let us know. You're here for a rewrite bootcamp. What is it that you're hoping to fix or address? What are the notes that you've gotten or the concerns that you have in your rewrite project, so I can sort of be, angling the instruction towards that specific kind of problem. We have a whole process that we can utilize to go through step-by-step how to rewrite a script, but obviously the first thing we always need to do is get some feedback. So we have to, after we've gotten the script to a shareable state, we're going to get that feedback, and we're going to probably want to share it with our close circle first, and then widen it to we're going to broaden that to get more reactions from more people afterwards. We're starting mostly with friends and family, and people you meet on servers like this are a great place to get that feedback if you feel your friends and family are not able to sort of address the story with the expertise that is required. So feel free to let us know in the chat, what is it that you're struggling with? What are you hoping to change? We have a big, long sort of presentation today that we're not going to get to all of, so I want to be able to kind of jump around in the second half of class to address what you guys are most concerned about. Here's some comments so far. Thank you, guys. Joel says, my tone right now feels like it's a sitcom, sometimes like a horror, but it's meant to be a sci-fi drama. Yeah, it's neither of those things. Okay, yeah, so tone, balancing, managing tone is going to be something that comes up in a lot of rewrites. This is where the kind of like emotional effect of your project is coming off in a way that you did not intend, or there's some emotion that, or some like flavor to the drama or to the narrative that you feel is not coming through properly, or it could be that it's too funny or too serious or something like that. So yeah, tone concerns, definitely something we can look at. Lee says, I'm writing a fantasy sitcom, my biggest growth points. What a great positive way to spin that. Growth points, I like that. Integrating the B story and raising the stakes through Act 2. Okay, great. Yeah, so that would be management of stakes throughout the story, which might be very tied into pacing as well. And integrating the B story, yeah, that's going to be just sort of plotting stuff and making sure that we're interweaving the different plots throughout your story. That's all just going to come down to sort of like plot management. During your outlining, you should try to be fixing as much of that as possible, but it's really just going to take writing a bunch of stories to be able to identify those problems in the early stages, as opposed to just running headlong into them when you've actually started the script. But it's okay when you're learning, you're writing these scripts, and you have to sort of just step on some landmines to realize where they are. We have some more comments. Jadea says, I have a problem with passive protagonists and plots easily spotted from my various loglines. Okay, great. Well, at least if it's easily spotted, then that's something that we can diagnose at the early stages. This is why we like to start with the logline, which is just that simplest expression of the premise, and sort of stress test it from there. Because if you stress test the foundation, then you build a little more, then you build a little more, and you're sort of testing it at every level, then you avoid having that problem of, oh, there's something flimsy in the mix and it's just going to collapse halfway down. So that's why I recommend we usually are going in this process, this 5-step process when we're writing a new script. We start with logline, or well, we start with just, bullshitting with your friends, basically, and just like talking about, wouldn't it be cool if there was a movie about blank? That's sort of like step 0, right? But our step 1 is going to be logline. We move from logline into sketchbook, where you're going to, blossoming from that seed of that one really well-written sentence that's going to express to us, who is this about? What are they trying to accomplish? What's standing in their way? And kind of give us a sense of the hook of that journey. You are then going to expand from there into just an unsorted document with all of your just kind of ideas, influences, inspiration. Just gather all your ideas in one place for lines of dialogue, places the characters might go, specific rules for the world of your story, ideas for scenes or sequences, or just, we're just going to use that sketchbook to gather everything in one place. From there, we expand into story beats, which are just like a list of the major events of the plot underneath the proper structural headings, so we know what's going where in the story, and like more or less what's going to happen in the movie, even though it doesn't have to be perfect or complete. From there, we expand into scene cards, which are going to be a more detailed version of those story beats that is going to take us through scene by scene, full paragraph for every scene. That also includes an estimate of the pages that it's going to take place on, so we have a sense of where you estimate that to fall in the script. And then from there you move to actually writing the script. And so by going, step by step through that process, you are starting with the smallest, simplest possible expression of that story, and then adding more and adding more, so that hopefully by following that sort of procedure, you avoid having this issue of, oh crap, something was miscalibrated along the way, now the whole thing is in a big, messy pile of debris. Anyway, so yeah, great to bring this up. Good things to be able to recognize early on, and it's nice when you can sort of preempt what those later notes are going to be by addressing them before you even start the pages. Jay says, pacing of the film going from low-intensity scenes to high-intensity ones. Yeah, pacing, so that's going to be just when things feel like they're not occurring where they should, essentially. In the story, things are happening too fast, or things are taking too long to happen, or it's taking too long for the story to get started, or we're rushing. It's like this whiplash question, right? Are you rushing, or are you dragging? And you have to sort of be able to come to identify that on your own if you can, but you're going to maybe really feel this when you start to get reads for the first time, and you're going to start to really be able to tell how would somebody who has no knowledge of this story experience this story. And that's where we're going to really see those pacing concerns come into play, and it may just require other people reading it and getting those first few reads to sort of really be able to assess what the pacing problems are. Also, just because there are certain readers who are just more patient than others. Certain readers are just like, I like a long first act. I don't mind if there's a long first act, whereas some readers are like, no, you have to get right to the point. So there's no accounting for taste, and we have to kind of always keep in mind that you should get feedback from a wide variety of sources. Like, obviously, mostly people with expertise of some kind would be good, but we want to be able to see where almost anyone is going to be tripping up on these things, or like if one or two people have a problem with the section, it may not be a big deal, but if 5 of them do, then you know that may be an area worth looking at. And just given the sort of law of large numbers, then we should be able to give the script to a bunch of people and generally figure out what those problems are, because the more people comment on it, the more likely that it is a problem. Okay, so we'll look at all those different sort of concerns today, and thank you for sharing that, everybody. Leopoldo tells us, I wrote my first script a few days ago, and I'm having trouble on what you should and shouldn't include in the action segments. Okay, so that sounds like more of kind of just like a writing on the page issue, maybe not so much a revising the whole script kind of problem, but I mean, yeah, that might come up in notes too. That might be something that you hear in your feedback and responses, is that you've included a lot of extraneous information in the action lines, or maybe you haven't given us enough info. It's actually tough to have that opposite problem of you were too laconic and brief. You were too kind of concise and to the point. So, especially if you read a script like Skyfall, which is just this fantastically written movie from 2012, then I think a lot of us have seen this, right? The script is so bare and sparse, but it uses just the right words, and you can get away with such conciseness in screenwriting that it's unusual for the problem to be you've been too brief and to the point. You know what I mean? So that's just something to think of. If one of the major concerns may be that you're including too much. One of the main ways to assess if you are or not is just reading lots of scripts. We should be reading 3 professional scripts a week is what I recommend. Minimum 1, but ideally 3 scripts a week, so that you can sort of just read what does really good writing look like, how much is an appropriate amount to include, how much does a reader need to really create that picture in their mind, and the answer is usually not as much as you'd think. Okay, so we have a couple other concerns that folks have mentioned in the chat. Thank you for sharing, guys. Third act is too quick. Willow tends to under-explain. I don't know how much to leave to the reader's imagination. Okay, so yeah, these are all similar things that it's like to gain the best sense of how much readers need to fully understand a scene or to see a scene. You got to just become a reader yourself, so you can therefore judge: do I have enough that I am able to see and picture and visualize the scene? Because as somebody who reads a lot of scripts, then you would have that breadth of knowledge, and you would have seen enough examples of that to know what the kind of standard was and just what works on the page. Okay, so before we go any further, I will say that if you're looking for how do I get better at not only rewriting, but any aspect of screenwriting, the main way is reading a lot. There's no way around this. There's no skipping this. This is not an optional step. It's one of the only 3 things you need to be doing to improve as a screenwriter and move further down the path of this bizarre and impossible career. You need to be reading professional work, at least 3 scripts a week, or, a script a week if that's all you can do, but try to keep your reading consistent. We have writing as your second step, meaning you need to be producing some kind of content, whether it's screenplays, or it could be, you could be writing pilots or plays or books or anything, but you have to be writing something. And last, you need to be moving on. Reading, writing, and moving on. Ideally moving on because you've finished a script or a project and you're ready to start the next one. But it could be because you have realized when you've done all you can, and it's time to simply finish something else. Because if you're getting to the point where whatever you're writing is preventing you from writing something else, then you are getting stuck in the mud, and we don't want that. You have to be able to be consistent with your output and not spend years and years writing one single thing. Even if it feels like it requires a ton of revision, you're going to eventually hit some kind of wall with most scripts, in a way that novelists don't seem to as much, because a novel is just so many more words. But the more you rework a script, it like almost always there's going to be a state where you've done all you can. You're just rearranging the deck chairs, and you're not really improving or moving forward. So try to get to that point where you recognize when you've done all you can. Obviously, you got to try your best to finish every script that you commit to. But at a certain point, sometimes it's just not going, or sometimes you've been rewriting it for way too long, or sometimes it could be that it's something that you tried so hard to get perfect, but it's just the fact that you can't get it perfect is preventing you from finishing, or something like that. So just try to work on that third skill. It's weird to think of it as a skill, but it is a skill of moving on as an essential part of getting good at screenwriting, and that I think will help you a lot. So just one more time to re-summarize: reading, writing, moving on. I need to make a poster that has that on it, or like a shirt or something. I do have my Script Camp shirt though, which we have, as well as other merchandise like hoodies, fanny packs, mouse pads. We got all kinds of stuff on the website. You can order it with your script coins. It doesn't even cost money. You can just use those digital cryptocurrency coins to get things like flip-flops or keychains. And by giving feedback, you will also earn more coins. So in our many text channels here on Script Camp, you can participate by reading the scripts that people post for feedback, by responding as best you can. You don't have to be an expert, but give them your honest read. Try to, you practice these skills of giving notes. Try to be incisive and honest and kind and respectful, and all these things that you should try to do when you're giving notes, and you will get more script coins that you can spend on more awesome flip-flops or on table reads or things like this. Okay, so you should probably have some idea of what the issues and problems in your script are, meaning that we shouldn't be rewriting before your script is done, or else we're just writing. It's just called writing if the script does not say the end at the end of it, and ideally you've gone through and you fixed it up to the point where you were willing to share it with somebody that was able to give you feedback on it. That's a script that is ready to be rewritten. So we shouldn't be giving our work to other people before it is really, really, really thoroughly combed through, that you've checked every page for the typos and the grammar and everything, like even the little things like that, which really do add up and instill a lot of confidence if you have it right, and detract a lot of confidence if you have a lot of that wrong, especially if it's in the first page, because it's like a construction zone where fines are doubled if you speed past the cement mixer or whatever. In your first couple pages, mistakes cost double in terms of your reader's confidence. So try to really make it feel like you have done your due diligence and you have put a lot of work into making this as good as as you can possibly make it, without that extra feedback before sharing with anybody. So that's just sort of like the important thing before you move any further. And then, so in this class, we're going to look at the kind of 5-step rewrite process and how to start approaching rewrites with a sense of organization and focus, which you may not have. If your first thought of how do you rewrite is, well, you just open the script and start moving stuff around and deleting dialogue and writing new dialogue and just sort of randomly skimming through and changing and moving things around, it's probably not the most efficient process, and you're really going to struggle, especially working professionally, where you need to be able to separate these things into, first of all, very distinct drafts. If we just make little changes here and there, and then eventually it ends up as a different script, but we don't know at what point we decided to start calling that a new draft, it's sort of difficult to distinguish them, and especially difficult if you're collaborating with other people who are going to get very lost if you're like, no, that was in version 1.6, not version 1.73. So if you approach it more like, I'm going to go through 4 passes on the script, or 5 passes maybe at the most, then between those you should be able to distinctly say that this plot element was in draft 2. We introduced this, we changed this, I redid the pacing, and we swapped this and this out for draft 3. We should just kind of know what is different in each of these drafts, because it's your responsibility when you're the screenwriter on a movie to be able to keep those drafts separate, especially if you're working with multiple drafts that have been given to you as somebody whose job it is to rewrite this script, which is something that I do for mostly horror and thriller movies, or not right now, obviously, but that I have done in the past. For mostly, smaller production companies and writer-directors, I'm given 5 different drafts of the script written by different writers at different times over the course of a year or more. And they're like, please make the best version of all of this. So in order to do that, you have to have a process, and you have to be able to very authoritatively take the reins and become not only the writer, but you're the script department at that point. People will ask you, was that in that draft or was that in that draft? And you have to kind of know the answer to that. You have to read each draft. You have to be able to collate all that information in your head and peel out just the best scenes and stitch together a new version of the script, which is going to require a really strong command of structural fundamentals and also just, moreover, a strong command of the process by which you will rewrite and redraft in the first place. You should have a process. You should have kind of a plan and a strategy moving into this so that it's not just kind of the Wild West where anything goes. You just open the script and move things around random until finally you're like, I guess that's draft 2. Every draft needs to come with a strategy. Okay, so if you're spending more than 6 months on a single script, you probably need to change something about your process. Just think of how much entertainment we are attempting to create. A script is at most like a 2-hour piece of entertainment, and we shouldn't be taking more than 6 months to craft 2 hours usually. A novel is different. A novel is potentially 15 to 25 hours for a shorter book, maybe 40 to 50 to 60 hours for a bigger book, right? So it makes sense that it might take years to write and redraft a novel at times. Still, if you want to be a working novelist, you should aim for a book every other year if you can. But in any case, you can see how with a script, it's so short, it's so concise, it's such a truncated document that you're going to get the best results sort of in a weird counterintuitive way by writing it pretty quickly, and then by having this plan in place to get the feedback, make a new list of notes, go in and address all those notes, and move on to this next draft, and be able to really clearly distinctify those different drafts and label them and know that exactly what has altered between them. So we have to have a plan moving through revision. Let's take a look at what that plan is. So here's the 5-step rewrite. We start with that feedback/notes document. Well, I guess step 0 is finish your script and share it with people. Obviously, that is its own whole set of challenges. We have lots of classes and things that look at how to actually write the script in the first place. But regardless of that, so you have shared the script. You've done all of it that you can do on your own. You're ready to share with some other people, so now you're going to give that out for feedback. Maybe aim for about, 5 to 10 readers in your first pass through, and then you are going to get them to read it. Give them, a month. It takes people a long time sometimes to get to reading things, so I would say give them about a month, then you can start asking, and maybe set a date where you're like, okay, this is the date I'm going to be soliciting feedback, so if everybody could meet back up here at that time, even if you haven't finished it, just give me whatever you have. That might be the best way to sort of press them into it. Or if you do organize a reading, that can be a really great way to get people to read it who otherwise would have taken forever to read it on their own. Okay, so you have shared it. You've gotten that feedback. So what you're going to do first is you're going to write all that feedback down. So if that's going to be verbal feedback, that means you're going to have to write some of it down yourself. As they are talking to you, you're going to go into your notes document. First, you're going to, make your notes document, right? So you make the notes document, which is nothing more than just a blank Google document where you're going to be keeping all the responses that you've gotten. And you can separate them by the person who's giving them or by the date that you're receiving that feedback, or you can organize it however you want. But on that document, you're just going to include bullet points of every note that they give you. Maybe you'll categorize it by the sort of area of revision. So maybe you'll say, these are just character notes. These are just going to be the dialogue notes or something like that. There's no real rule as to how you want to organize the notes that you've gotten. But you're going to want to just have, a brief, quick, like a sentence or two at minimum for each one, maybe a couple more if it's a complex idea. But you just have to get all those notes together in the same place, the notes document. From there, you're going to move into your re-outline. The re-outline means you're going to take your script and you're going to write a new outline for it, regardless of if you had an outline before, which ideally you did, but maybe you didn't. In any case, you're going to make one for this version of the script as it stands. So you're going to essentially make a new set of scene cards, or at least you can copy and paste some of your old ones if they all ended up being exactly how you thought. And you have to make a new outline for the version of the script that you ended up with, not what you planned to make. So you're not actually moving anything around yet. The re-outline is simply to get a bird's-eye view of the script that you have. We have a question. Do you have to be in the tub when receiving feedback? Yes, you do. You do have to be in a bathtub. Go ahead, Paul.
I was wondering if, say, does this work also if you didn't finish an older script, like if you're going back?
If you didn't, the script is not done.
Yeah, like say you only did like a few pages of the old script because okay, so in my case, I have a few scripts that I never finished because I didn't outline them well enough and I got lost.
Hmm.
Um so I was wondering like if this rewrite process would like help with something like I guess rebooting the script.
I don't think so because this process starts with getting feedback, and we shouldn't be getting feedback on things that aren't finished.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I would
Yeah.
normally say. So if it turns out that you didn't finish it in the first place, then I would just probably start at the beginning of the writing process, not the rewriting process. So I'd go to
Okay.
logline, sketchbook, story beats, scene cards, then pages. And then once you've gone through that whole thing, then you can move on to this process. But
All right,
my
thanks.
thought is that it would just kind of break a lot if you open up the lid and start rearranging stuff without having completed it in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the question, though. Okay. What else? So we have gone over what was that 1 and 2. So yeah, 1 and 2. 1 is get that feedback and make that notes document. 2 was re-outline. So you're making a new outline that reflects the version of the story that you have. And I might as well just show you guys one of my re-outlines here. Here we go. And when I did this one, I also did a character list. I started with a character list because it's an ensemble movie, and there was a lot of characters. So I had to make a full list of everybody, and also just a short description of them, and anything else relevant about them, age, race, basic details. And for ensemble, if your script is an ensemble story, I recommend doing the same thing so you don't lose track of anyone in the kind of tapestry of the narrative. So you might start with the character list. You don't have to do that. At the top, I also ended up writing out the theme, just as clearly as possible. Just write the dramatic argument right there at the top. You're still going to want to have the logline guiding you. If you needed to change the logline, then this is where you would have the most up-to-date version. And of course, we have comps, genre, and title. And then underneath it, here's my revision guide with all the... It's already marked up and highlighted because I already worked my way through this, but you can see these are like the notes that I've gotten, all of which I've addressed. We have sort of stuff that I haven't... Some things that I hadn't quite gotten to yet. But in any case, you should make a separate document for this. Your revision outline is going to be the sort of roadmap that's going to help you through the entire rewrite. So let's look at revision guide. So we've talked about notes document and re-outline. The next step is to make a copy of your re-outline. We make a copy of it because we want to have one version of it that just stays like a clean, untouched version of, a bird's eye view of this draft of the story that just tells us exactly what happens on what page, basically. And then you make a copy of that so you won't be editing the original. And you're going to use that as the basis of your revision guide. So you're going to sort of mash the previous two documents together. You're going to take the notes that you got in the notes document, and you're going to copy them into the appropriate places in the revision guide. And therefore be able to sort of create this chronological roadmap of your entire story. So if you have scene cards that are, you've redrafted for this version of the story, just very cleanly lay out what exactly occurs in each scene. Then you can now go in with the notes, and you can put them where they need to go. So if you're like, this scene ended up being too short, lengthen and flesh it out. You can kind of give yourself instructions for how to move forward. And in some cases, you may need to go into the text itself and kind of highlight individual things that will need to change, like you're going to change a character's name, or you're going to change some element of what happens in the scene. You might need to kind of just use your yellow highlight and mark up exactly what needs to change. And if you're planning on cutting some elements, then you're going to highlight those in red. So we use this kind of stoplight system, red, green, and yellow. There we go. To mark up your scene cards, or your redrafted version of your scene outline. And now you're going to create, essentially, a full roadmap that will take you beginning to end chronologically through and tell you what needs to change in every single scene. I hope that's pretty clear. I know it's sort of hard to read someone else's outline just as I skim through it. But we're going to use this color coding system and a lot of different elements of outlining. I think it's just really useful. We mark green if the scene is basically fine. It's as it's intended to be. Maybe you got good feedback on how it turned out. Yellow is something that indicates that element needs to change or is still being worked on, and red means that thing will be cut or you plan to cut it, but you wanted to remember what it was for some reason. So as you go through then and use this as the basis for your rewrite, you're going to highlight things green as you finish them. You're going to highlight things yellow if they're not finished yet or you're still working on them, and highlight as we get past the red things. I would just delete them because we want it to all be green by the end. So that's my process of and how I kind of color code the different revisions. You don't have to do exactly that, but I just find it useful. And when you are starting those new pages, my preferred method or my suggestion of how to do that is you're actually going to start a brand new document from scratch. You're not going to just open up an old version from the script and change things around. Start a new page 1 blank document, and you can copy and paste from the previous version of your script as needed, but that should not be your default reaction to every new scene. You should kind of give yourself the room and the space to make new connections between scenes and to kind of write with this psychological clarity that you wouldn't have if all the text was already there on the page. So when we actually move to pages in the rewrite, step 4, working from that revision guide as an outline and using the previous draft of your script to draw text from if occasionally, then you will work through the entire new version of the story until you get to the end. So that's the basic rewrite process, and from there we move on to extra passes, which are, once you've gone through the essentials and the major kind of changes that need to be made, you may find yourself working on an extra revision pass for dialogue, an extra pass for just characters or maybe specific characters. You may do a pass for just action. You may do a pass for just pacing. Anything else that feels like it just still needs work, you're going to try to address in these additional passes until everything is worked through and finished. Okay, so let's not do this right now. This was, I think, from our earlier revision class where we're sort of guiding you through every step, so you don't have to follow these instructions, but basically, I think we've gone over feedback document already, but the point of that is aggregating all of your notes into the same place, and we're sort of trying to determine which of the notes that we want to keep and which ones aren't as important. Well, generally, the stuff that more than one person has mentioned is going to be the stuff that is most relevant, and that you should probably pay attention to, even if you feel that you disagree with it or you feel it wouldn't make the story better. If more than one person mentions it, it may not be important that you don't think it's a problem. It may just actually be a problem. Unless there's some horrendous reason why you feel that they have misinterpreted that, like in your reading, you did a reading of it and somebody read the lines in like a totally different tone than you meant, and maybe you got notes that were like, why was this scene supposed to be funny? I didn't think it was a funny movie. Well, in that case, maybe the specific circumstance would have led to you getting that note, and you don't have to necessarily incorporate that, but normally be thinking, if more than one person mentions something, it's something that I need to highlight and pay attention to in my notes document. But we're generally looking for the note behind the note, which is this concept that we talk about all the time in the world of screenwriting, which is, why did somebody actually give this? What are they really trying to get at, and what are they trying to address by saying that thing? And you may need to, when you in your notes document, if it's sort of unclear on the page what that person meant, you may need to clarify for them. You may need to rephrase their note, or you may need to write out in parentheses afterwards, they suggested doing this, but I think the answer is doing this, or I think I'm sort of assessing why they were saying that because of this. We have to approach this almost like a doctor. That's right. That's like, your patient is saying, my arm hurts. Well, my arm could hurt for 100 different reasons. And we, at a certain point, need to not so much take the person saying my arm hurts as, the end-all, be-all of the problem. That may just be a symptom, or that maybe you're feeling your arm hurt because the circulation is cut off inside, or something like that. We need to take that as the starting point, but we may need to dig a little deeper to figure out what exactly is wrong and how exactly do I fix it, because my patient is not going to be the best person to determine how to fix it necessarily. So always look for that note behind the note. Ask yourself, especially because people, are responding, unless they are development executives or they are very experienced in this, they're not always going to know exactly how to present these things to you, or what vocabulary lexicon to use in expressing these ideas, or they may not always be able to speak the same language as you, so to speak. So you may have to kind of figure that out, or you may need to do things like somebody saying, I think you should cut the principal character. He's really boring. Every scene with the principal made me so bored. But then you sort of realize maybe it's just you have a slow opening scene that happens to have the principal in it. And the problem isn't the character. The problem is just you have a slow start. So that might actually be sort of the note behind the note. You need to sort of address or do your best to figure out why is the person having that specific reaction, and if they are giving you prescriptive advice, then chances are that that may not be the best way to fix it, but it is a red flag that something is wrong, that you need to sort of do that detective work yourself and figure out how would I address that. Okay, what else? We're trying to diagnose script problems, so I recommend checking out the Verve coverage guide if you guys haven't looked at this PDF before. That sort of just gives you a really nice breakdown of all the different aspects of a script and how we evaluate them and the things that we should be paying attention to, but here's just sort of a broad list. We can start with premise and concept. Ideally, there's not a major issue with premise and concept, because if that is where the problem is, then chances are the whole movie may not be working, and no matter how many rewrites you do of plot, structure, pacing, character, or anything else, if the concept itself is flawed, then something's really, really off, and you need to definitely go back to the drawing board on your project to some degree, if that is the kind of consensus of all your notes. And chances are you will have to do some major, major changes if that is the case. Then we have plot and structure, which it's pretty common to get notes on this. It may just be indicating that your script feels sort of astructural, or it feels like one act or the other may be too long or too short. It could be any number of problems. It could be that you're just kind of, there's not really a clear midpoint, or there isn't this really strong all is lost moment that the reader was hoping for or looking for, or it may be that you aren't really just exploring your plot to the highest extent of its potential. Like if the reader felt like they wanted more out of your story, maybe it could be that you haven't kind of in the plot explored every avenue that the reader would have hoped that you did. If you make this promise, and this is almost always going to come down to this disconnect between promises and the fulfillment of those promises and the expectations that people have, but it could be if you've pitched this as a story about a robot hunting cop or something like that, for instance, and then you put the movie almost entirely in boardrooms of people just talking about being robot hunting cops, then, and not actually showing them doing that, and not watching a lot of that action play out, then it could feel like you just have a fundamental problem with plotting, that you just aren't using the premise that you aren't building the movie that you have sort of made people expect or want. Okay, so what else? Pacing, that's just going to be how we move through the structure, essentially, if we're spending too long or too little time on any individual section. Characters and dialogue, you'll get notes on all the time, so we're going to always be looking for, not specifically, did the audience like this character, or did they not like them? But we might ask, are they investing in this journey, or are they not investing in the journey? And that is because you have to keep in mind, we really like unlikable characters. So if someone starts to say, if the note is, I didn't like this character enough, chances are the person who's giving that note just means I wasn't fully keyed in to why they were doing what they were doing. I didn't buy into their motivations, or otherwise there's some other problem. It's not that we just didn't like them as a person, like we wouldn't want to hang out with them. Usually that note means something else is actually wrong. What else? Prose and formatting. So if there's major problems with your formatting, then chances are you're in your first couple scripts, because the formatting, although it might seem sort of like there's a lot of rules and it's like really tough at first to get it right, once you've written a few scripts, you should not be having problems with this anymore. And if you're doing the proper amount of reading, which is 3 scripts a week, then you absolutely should not be having this problem, because you'll sort of see that the rules aren't as restrictive as you think, and there's lots of ways that you can pull off even the same effect on the page. So just read a lot to make sure that you're understanding what a great script looks like and feels like, what the prose and formatting standards and conventions are, what do the different kind of voices and variations on tone look like on the page. A Shane Black script is going to look totally, totally, totally different from a Lynn Ramsey script or something like that. So just note those distinctions, and you should be able to see them in your own work too. Genre and tone are maybe also coming down to this thing of promises and expectations that your reader has, where based on everything from the logline to the title to the genre itself, we're going to have certain things that we just expect to see in the story, and if they aren't there, or it isn't creating enough of the emotion that we came in wanting to have, then maybe that you aren't executing on the tone properly, or that you've created the wrong tone, or that you just aren't fulfilling the genre promises in the first place. So you should know your genre really well, and you should read and write a lot of your genre. You should not be writing in a genre that you aren't really familiar with and that you aren't a big fan of, unless you're getting paid a ludicrous amount of money to do so. I think that I may just pause for questions for a moment before we go into expanding the different steps of the rewrite, and then we will kind of jump around to different sections based on the things that you guys said that you were working on. We have slides on everything from dialogue, pacing. What else do we have? Characters, how we connect with characters, just the basics of prose and formatting on the page, overwriting, underwriting, slug lines, and rules of how the slug lines are being utilized. How do we know when we're finished? Things like that. All right, so we have lots of different sections we could jump to. So in a moment, once we get through our expansion of the rewrite process, we're going to ask, what are you guys struggling with, and how can I jump to a section of the presentation that addresses those things? Okay, so let's start with just any questions about what we've talked about so far, or about how to evaluate feedback that you have received. Feel free to either raise a hand or use the text chat. Any questions? Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is more of a, I wouldn't say this is like really a specific example, like, how do you move past receiving quite a bit of good feedback on something and trying to focus more on things that are critical? Because I've received a lot of feedback on this script. There's been some conflicting feedback. The bad feedback I've received aren't from people they were from really random people that I wouldn't say that I knew kind of their experience or their opinion, and I didn't think they really understood the characters and like what I was going for. But then the good feedback has been from people that I trust and respect, and meet with quite a bit. So I'm trying to figure out how to be more critical, and I guess kind of pinpoint the issues, or just I guess in general be more critical of your first draft.
Oh, just the first draft too. Okay. Sure. Well, this is a good problem to have, I would say. If you have gotten so much good feedback that you're unsure how to move forward or improve it from the people that you trust and feel like have that expertise, then that's kind of what we want, right? So that is a sign that something is working well. I would ask, of course, did those same readers that you trust and feel that you respect the expertise, do they have constructive or, bad feedback might not be the best word, but, what did Lee call it? Improvement points or something like that? Did they have any of those improvement points as well? And if not, can you ask them for some? If maybe, go ahead, you can answer that if you want. Go ahead. Did you feel that they had given you some more critiques as well?
Yeah, so I definitely did get some criticism, so it wasn't just, people blowing smoke up my ass. Mm-hmm. There were definitely good things that I really respected, and I am implementing into the next draft. So I guess it's kind of like, I'm kind of like wondering now, like, this is also a new question. What point do you feel like you're done?
Great question. So yeah, let me I have a slide on this, so let's just move ahead to that slide, I think. How do we know when you're done? Well, the funny thing is, scripts are never finished, only abandoned. Isn't that what somebody said? So we kind of are, quote, never done, because unless it has been produced, you're done when it's been produced and it's in a theater and you're at the premiere watching the movie. That's when you're kind of done with that script. And because that almost never happens, and there's so many steps in between in that case, then that can't really be the metric that we're going to use to determine, okay, have I completed all the work that I will ever want to do on the script? So there's just not one easy answer to that question. All we can do is sort of address every note that we can, and then send it out for another read, and you're going to run out of reads with the people that have read it a couple times already. Usually nobody wants to be reading variations on the same script over and over and over again. So you'll send it out again to ideally a fresher set of eyes that are going to be able to read it, and you're just going to have to keep doing that until the notes you are getting, you feel, are not going to improve it anymore, or are things that you have already done or are things that you just don't think would improve the movie. So, I said the same thing twice, didn't I? But regardless, so that's normally going to be about 3 to 5 drafts. And I kind of gave that very arbitrary, like, 6-month mark before. So maybe you can start assessing it by just the time that you've spent on it. So if it has pushed past the 6-month mark, then it may be time to say, I've done all I can on this and I'm ready to start moving ahead to that next thing. Or maybe even if, you had a bunch of stuff going on in life and during that 6 months you're only able to do 1 draft, then maybe you're going to want to count it by drafts instead and say, I've done my 3 drafts, and then I sort of send it out for final reads, and if there aren't any major things, then I just sort of declare it done, and you will decide to stop. And at that point, I usually like to cap it off with a reading. I think a reading is a really good sort of finale to a spec, which is almost never going to have an actual finale, right? We're not going to have a finish line and a party and a bunch of confetti for finishing something, so have a reading, even if it's just with your friends and family. Have people over, get the pizza, and then just maybe even DJ some music in the background while you're reading it. It's super fun to do, and then that was sort of your performance of the script, and you can get more feedback during that if you want to. You don't have to, but in any case, I would just see how that goes, and if that kind of accomplishes your goals, if that sort of, that's like the most in terms of applause and satisfaction you're going to get from most scripts. So consider that to be the premiere. Consider that to be the finale. After your 3 to 5 drafts, you've done your reading, you've addressed every note that you can, and you think that you have fixed all the major problems and the additional notes you're getting are not making it better. Then you'll say, I'm ready to do X with this script, whatever X might be. But of course, you know that when you set it up somewhere, you'll have to do more revisions on it. And then once it's shooting, they'll do more revisions on it. So that's why we always say it's never really, quote, done. So you have to just abandon it when it's at a point where you feel you've done as much as you can. I know it's a lame answer, but it's sort of the only answer.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. So yeah, think of it as maybe a tactical retreat, if that might help you. At a certain stage, we will tactically retreat because, I don't know, the enemy will never fully be eradicated or something, if we're going to pursue that metaphor. Yeah, you have to just step away at some point. You're just not going to be... You're going to hit a stage of diminishing returns. I recommend about four drafts if you're just starting at this, and unless you have working with a development executive or manager, in which case I've done up to like 8 to 10 drafts, and it's just agonizing. But that's different because you're working with someone. All right, here's some more questions in the chat. Or is this maybe not questions? Maybe these are just comments. Morgana says, I abandoned my first script after getting completely sick of it. At one point I said, F it, it's done. Yeah, you basically just have to plan for that. Like, plan for that stage. If you're like, okay, screw it, I cannot do a single additional thing, I will set it aside until I'm able to do something career-wise with this. Okay, any other questions on the assessment of your own feedback or revision process before we move on to expanding those different steps? Dan tells us, rewriting is the hard part because it all goes off course from the outline that I set up so painstakingly. Yeah, I hate revision personally. Some people love it. I was just talking to Max Perry about this the other day, and he was like, that's my favorite part. I love having something to actually work with and move around with my hands, but I'm just like, I'm done already with this thing. I want to move on to the next thing because I'm sort of energized by writing something new. But some people really do love if you find yourself really loving revision, then consider yourself lucky. That's like a victory in a way, because so much of this is just endless rewriting. Okay, if there's no more questions, I may just move through those steps of the rewrite before we sort of jump around to our different kind of grab bag of our potpourri of different topics. Here's a question. Heated123 asks, can you edit while writing, or is that always a no-no? Well, I would say it's not really... I wouldn't call it editing. I would just call it writing. So while you are writing the script, you're going to be moving things and changing things around sometimes. I wouldn't usually recommend rigorously going back and editing and sort of like rearranging things and fixing things as you go. No. I usually suggest if you feel there's a big change that's come up, or feel that there's a big change that you think will need to be made in the next draft, just continue to the end pretending you've already made that change, And then when you get to the end, like, you want to preserve that sense of momentum through the script. So you're getting a certain number of pages done per day, and it just becomes really difficult to kind of track that when you're editing and moving and rearranging things as opposed to writing brand new scenes and material. So I would say just right through to the end, and then once you've gotten to the end, then you can go back and make any of those changes that you worked through, assuming that you had made already. But yeah, I would say pretty much don't be, quote, editing as you go. All right, so I think I'm going to move to expanding these different parts of the outline. I know this is kind of technical craft stuff and is not super exciting, so I'll go kind of quickly through it. Or, I don't know, you can feel free to play your Minecraft while you're listening or something like that. Normally I don't recommend such blasphemy, but in this case, this is all kind of nitty-gritty. That's why you guys are here, right? This is the nitty-gritty hard work of rewriting a script. Well, you're going to have to really get your hands dirty as you tear this thing open and fix all the bits inside. So let's look at, I hope that at least the essential overview of this process works. So I'm just going to quickly go through it one more time. We start with simply finish the script, give it to people, get their feedback, collect all that feedback in the notes document. Next, you're going to write a new scene card outline for the version of the script that you have, ignoring the changes that you'd want to make or how you wish it turned out or anything like that. You're just writing an outline for the version of the script that you have completed. You then are going to create a copy of that, which you're going to title your revision guide. You're going to copy and paste notes from your notes document into your revision guide to build that roadmap forward. That's going to say, it's like a set of scene cards with all the alterations that need to be made to the scenes kind of added to them. You're then going to start a brand new blank document, and you're going to copy and paste from your previous draft as needed, but you're going to work through, write new scenes, write new connective tissue between these scenes, whatever you need to do to get to the end of this new version. And then once you've done that, you're going to go through the extra passes for everything from character, dialogue, prose, action, whatever it is that needs more help until it is done. All right, that was the overview. Let's go a little more into each step one at a time. So we talked about that notes document. Let's look at the reoutline. So in the reoutline, you start with just a list of every scene in your script, describe what happens in prose format, like a sentence or two for each scene. And it may be difficult at this point to actually include those page counts of which pages the scenes take place on, but if you're going to be doing extensive rewriting, it's probably a good idea to, on each scene card, say this scene takes place from page 1 to 2. This scene is page 2 to 3, etc., etc. Probably this is just going to be for you, so it doesn't have to be a really beautiful, well-written document. It doesn't have to be super complete sentences. It doesn't have to be something that anyone else could just pick up and understand right away, unless you're doing this in collaboration with producers, other writers, a director, executives, or anything like that, in which case you do have to kind of put that extra work into making even the reoutline really legible and clear. Don't use shorthand. Don't use like code nicknames for the characters or anything like that. You have to really write everything out in very direct and readable fashions if you're going to be doing this for other people. But if you're not, then feel free to write this however you want. I think we looked at my revision outline, didn't we? This is the major revision notes. I don't think this includes the scene cards from this one. Let me look in here. Yeah, that would be more like this. This is from a novel, not a screenplay. But you can see on the left-hand side of my screen, I'll just bring it up here. It's very helpful if you're using the outlining elements, because then you can sort of have a little table of contents for yourself in Google Docs. You can write out exactly where each chapter or scene is going to take place, the page number that it's going to take place on, and also the structural headings over top of each section to remind you what we're actually doing there. What is the purpose of that moment? So I just find it useful to have this sort of little table of contents, which you can achieve in Google Docs by using the headings. So different headings will automatically add to the document outline, which you can find by clicking View and then clicking Show Outline. View, Show Outline, right here. Control-Alt-A is the shortcut for that. And it's just useful to be able to see, okay, that's my entire story. Just this right here. That's the whole thing, and we can, we're very zoomed out. We have just the very basics, but we can sort of keep the whole thing in our head a little bit easier if we have this nice little table of contents. So, what next? What if your script has major problems? That's a good question. Let's move this text so we can actually see the whole thing. So it might be helpful to write out the story beats, which you saw on my document that I had there. I had written out exactly where's the midpoint. I have premise scenes, escalation, all is lost, pit of despair, everything like that, or whatever structure it is that you're using. Maybe you're not using this exact method, but whatever you're using, it might be helpful if there's major issues in the story to add those things in, just so you can kind of keep track of where you are and what you're doing in each section. So we might consider this re-outline just a bulleted list of the key moments in your protagonist's journey. It's going to help you examine that entire story at a glance and identify those problems. So we have written out the re-outline, which is that outline that reflects the version of the script that we have with a few sentences for each scene at the least. We're then going to mark that up as our revision guide. Remember, it's a copy of the re-outline. That's the framework for your new draft. And here's that summary of the traffic light system. Green means keep it, it's as it's intended to be, or I got good feedback on it. Yellow means it is in progress, being worked on, or needs to change. And red means I will cut that thing when I get to it. And then when you go into the rewrite, I already went over those basics, but start that new blank file. And you may want to open your old script in a separate window or export it to a format that's easier for copying text, which, by the way, is not a PDF. Text does not copy and paste that well from PDFs and can throw the formatting off. So I recommend actually for rewrites, you go into your old version of the script and you export it as an HTML or TXT document, which is just a little easier to copy and paste. Except in some screenwriting softwares, which do better at this than others. But starting on page 1, you're going to copy and paste individual lines or scenes as needed, but don't always do that. And continually update your revision guide color coding to reflect your progress in the new draft as you go. By the end, there should be no more red sections, and there should ideally be no more yellow sections unless you sort of are like marking something for you to remember for later. Ideally, it should be all green. All right, and then we move into these extra passes. So these passes for specific elements might require their own look through, things like the B story or the C story or dialogue, characters, prose, formatting, tone. Anything like that, you're just going to have to make your own, do a new read-through of the script and editing pass through that script, paying attention exclusively to one of these things at a time. And if you're doing an ensemble story, chances are you will have to do one pass-through for each character to make sure you're ironing out their motivations and making it feel like they are properly, they have the proper amount of urgency, they have high enough stakes in the story, they're properly invested, and that your audience is just going to be able to root for them and follow their journey, even if they're not, a likable character. We should at least understand them. I find it kind of helpful when you're doing the character passes, maybe go through each time and imagine that the script, this works great for ensembles, you're not always going to be able to do this, but think of, imagine the story has a new title that is from that character's perspective, right? So we do a new, when you're doing your character pass on Star Wars, you'd call it like, I don't know, Darth Vader and the Wicked Rebel Alliance, right? Or Darth Vader and his meddling son, or something like that, where you're like, okay, I'm imagining the story entirely from that character's point of view this time, so I'm going to, as I'm thinking of this as a new story, they're going to have to be the hero of that story, so to speak. So everything they do has to be properly motivated, and we are just kind of going to be able to give a lot of life to your villain character and also your side characters if we go through each time and imagine, okay, they're the most important person in those individual passes through. So that's just a tip that might help you in character passes. Here's a question in the chat. Is it okay to write the script in my own format first and then translate it to the industry standard later on? Or should I learn to get comfortable and do it in the proper format? Definitely the second thing. I would not be writing in your... That just is going to like double the amount of time, at the very least, that it takes to do this. So for sure, definitely learn how to write in this format. But the nice thing is, I do a lot of just kind of drafting out scenes on Google Docs without any formatting at all, and then I copy and paste them into the Final Draft or Art Studio or Writer Duet. I'll show you guys what I mean. I'll be writing a scene like this, just in Google Docs with no fancy formatting at all. It'll just look like, I'll be like, Jeff, where's it? Jeff walks in the room. Hello? Silence. He takes a few steps. A bird flaps out of a box. Terrible sentence, but whatever. You get the idea. I'm just writing it like this with no formatting. Just the only formatting I'm doing is pressing enter after each line, and then once that's done, copy and paste that scene one scene at a time into the formatting software and make sure it all looks right. But I guess that's how I would approach that. Like I would still get used to the format. The industry standard format is one you're going to be working a lot in. You should be reading a lot of scripts, and you should be writing a lot in that format too. Let me see if there were any more questions in the chat. Carmen says I do this longhand. That is unusual for screenwriters to do any writing longhand, but if it works for you, then go for it. It's going to be tough to collaborate that way, definitely, because we have all these tools nowadays, everything from Google Docs to Writer Duet or whatever, have real-time collaboration that allow it to instantly be visible and editable on someone else's screen. So I wouldn't recommend longhand for collaborations, but for your own work, then yeah, do whatever works for you. Okay, let me stop for any questions on the 5 steps of our rewrite process before I start jumping around and addressing some of the concerns that you guys were facing in your scripts in different parts of the slideshow, this super epic length slideshow that I have here. So, any questions on these 5 steps? Notes document, re-outline, revision guide, rewrite, extra passes. Carmen, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I clicked on somebody else first. Who did I click on? Was it Taryn? Hi.
All right. So I was wondering, you're saying that the re-outline, you could use scene cards. Is the scene cards part of it, or can you use the scene cards instead of doing the re-outline? Like if you're using like a screenwriting software that has scene cards, that's capable of making scene cards for you, can you just use that instead?
The music in the background is blowing my mind. Are you hearing that? Yeah. That's coming from you, right?
Where is that coming from? It's not coming from me. When I logged on, it was there. I don't know why, but
maybe you're in. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Joel.
Okay, I see it now. Okay, I thought you guys had it on. I didn't know.
No, it's okay. I thought you were trolling us at first. I was like, "How are you? You're just gonna play music on our thing?" But no, not your fault. You're totally fine.
Okay.
Let me go back to the question. Sorry, because my brain was so distracted the entire time. So you were asking, when you do the re-outline, can you use the previous scene cards that you had? Was that the question?
Well, the scene cards, is the scene cards the actual outline itself, or is it separate? Like, you know how some screenwriting softwares have different. They can make outlines for you out of your screenplays after you write it.
Mm-hmm.
Can that be done instead of writing the whole outline? It's not the same thing?
So to me, a full outline is comprised of a set of thorough scene cards. So yeah, I hope that maybe that answers that question. Yes, the scene cards are the outline. So it's just the most expanded version of the outline. It's like the final version of the outline. So until you have a full set of, in my method, obviously you can use whatever method you want, but in the method that I teach and utilize, we start with story beats, we expand that into scene cards, and then we move to pages from there. So if you have, for instance, if you had a set of scene cards from the first draft of the script, you can use some of them in your re-outline if those scenes ended up exactly as you intended them to. But sometimes they won't, and sometimes what you ended up with is going to be different from that plan. So that's why we make a new set of them to kind of reflect the version of the story that you ended up drafting.
Okay, so that the re-outline is before you make the edits?
Right, yeah. So we have to make the re-outline to sort of see the version of the story that we have. That's why it's step 2. And then,
okay, and then
yeah, go ahead.
Copy. And then make a copy, and then put the notes that you received from different people, the feedback, in the copy.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, and then another question. You had some stories, some steps to do if you had problems with your script. Do you mind putting that slide back up when you get a chance?
Yeah, sure. I think it was. You mean the one that was like, what if you have big problems?
Yeah, that one.
Sure. I'll find it for you. Give me one moment. Thank you for the questions.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm finished.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'll move you back to the audience. Let me bring up that slide. I think that was... Ooh, where's that? Here it is. What if my script has major problems? So yeah, this was mostly about including story beats in your re-outline. If you feel that there aren't going to be huge structural changes, you may not need to mark out, this is the midpoint, this is the act break, etc. But you may have to if you're going to have to make these huge alterations to the structure. You have a question, can I just share the slides? Yeah, sure, I'll just share the slides. You guys can actually browse through all the ones I'm not going to be able to get to today. This is kind of a conglomeration of many of our previous ones. Conglomeration? Amalgamation? What word should I use? Words are hard. All right, I think we had some more questions in the chat. Hang on, I'm scrolling up a little bit. I think Carmen had a question before I accidentally clicked somebody else. Go ahead, Carmen, if you're able to accept the invite to speak. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't want to ask a question that you can't answer. But I mean, usually you always give really good answers to questions that I think like, okay, he's never going to be able to answer this, but you usually do. It's really weird.
I'll try my best.
So, yeah, so I was thinking about the structural problems because a lot of times I notice I'm starting things kind of late because I'm so busy like trying to set things up so that the causation can be strong, right? Mm-hmm. In the second half, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I think like that can be like a problem, right? Especially with like if you're writing straight horror as opposed to horror drama, right? Because drama is kind of drags out more. You're focusing more on the person's journey mm-hmm. and that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so I think like my question is, I think I know, if you could just verify if this is correct. Okay. That at the point that I can follow my characters around and write whatever they're doing, just kind of observing them as long as they're falling into the plan. And that is why I really, really focus on the outlining part really strongly so that I can feel like, okay, I have really thoroughly exploited this narrative, right? And that's why I write narrative also. Mm-hmm. So that I can feel like, okay, I've looked at this story from a lot of different angles, and so this is what's just happening now, right? When it's time for the scene parting, yes, I want to be able to do what Nacho said, you know, like feel like I'm in the creative process at that time, but that never happens until I go to the pages, right? So then when I go to the pages, then it's like, okay, so I don't want to lose track of what I'm really trying to say. So at the point where my characters are totally doing things that are not falling into the structure that I've already created, that's when I got to step back and say, wait a minute, no, you're not going to do that right now because that is not the plan, mm-hmm. right? I got to tell them, I control them, right? That is not the plan. This is not what we're going to do. So you need to go back over there. Okay. So, because what happens is things start going in a way that it was never planned because something will happen that, oh, well, okay, whatever happened in that. So then the other character has to behave accordingly, mm-hmm. right? Because then there's going to be that loose thread or that missing piece, you know. So then I have to go ahead and let them do what they're going to do to address that issue.
Right.
So then that's okay. That's okay. As long as, okay, so somebody is supposed to die in my current project in the last few pages, and that's not actually happening. No, sorry, it's the other way around. They were supposed to die. They were not supposed to die. See, I'm so confused. And this is where this is another one of my issues too, because how can I think logically about this when it's vegetable soup? You know, I'm saying my brain feels like vegetable soup. I can't even tell, like, sometimes, earlier I was like, in the last reading I was like, oh, I redacted this stuff because I don't want to assault people with the darkness that's in my mind, right? And I don't know if there's, like, young people in there. So it wasn't that script that I redacted. It's another one. The next one that's coming up. I have just a few lines of redacted stuff. So yeah, it's getting darker and darker. Okay. And that's okay, right? I mean,
This,
it's kind of like a process, like a process of darkening with every writing. It's like a process of darkening. It's like I'm able to take more and more chances. So I feel like that's okay. I'm okay. Like mentally, I'm okay with that, right? But the thing about it, what I'm saying is that it's like, what if, okay, I'll write it down. I'll bring it up in another class because I can't figure it out. I feel like vegetable soup.
okay.
That's the problem.
So
So,
it seems
yeah.
like, but what you were getting at was the idea of how do you stay on track and not deviate from the outline and make sure your characters are, you're maintaining the sort of spontaneity and creativity of taking it past the sort of spontaneous fun of figuring out what happens in a scene while also sticking within the boundaries of what you set out to do. Was that what you were sort of asking about before?
Yes, and specific. See, you always can track me. That's so cool. Okay, specifically with the rewriting, I feel like it's gonna take away from the original intention of the characters because they're kind of like they're alive, somewhere in story world,
Hmm.
and I don't feel like I should control them 100%. Because they're entities in and of themselves. So when I go back for the rewriting, how do I strike that balance of having something that has the logic and it has keeps the creativity of the original intention of the character themselves,
Sure.
kind of mess that.
Yeah, no, this is a good question. So what I think might work for you is a little bit less specific scene cards, maybe. If instead of saying, Joe stubs his toe on a rake, and that's how he ends up in the hospital, maybe you just write, Joe gets hurt on the farm, something like that.
Yeah.
And then when you actually get to that scene, you can try it in 3 different ways. Or you can just say, maybe instead of tripping on a rake, he falls into a river. Or instead of falling, like maybe that doesn't end up working, so you think of something better as he's on the way to the river. So it might just allow you to be a little bit more creative or spontaneous in the moment if your scene cards themselves just kind of more broadly describe what happens rather than very specifically saying how it happens. So you actually might be one of those writers that benefits from having a little looser constraints, but still try to accomplish what the card said, even if you feel that like the characters have kind of drifted away from it a little bit, or away from that that objective a little bit, or whatever it is, like they end up in a different place than you thought they would. Still try to stick within the boundaries just to ensure that the writing process is easier and redrafting is easier. But maybe in your cards themselves, try specifying less, and then you'll allow yourself that kind of mental freedom to be more creative.
Okay, that does make sense.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps or works for you. And if anyone's having a
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think so. I think so because well, I'm gonna stop right there. Thank you, Connor.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So yeah, I'd recommend that to anyone having that issue. You feel like you're getting locked into this version of events. Well, maybe take a little step back and just tell us the end result of the scene, and then allow yourself to maybe meander there in different ways. If it turns out that you're having trouble writing the scene at all, maybe that technique is not for you. But and this might just give you the freedom to say, I'm going to write 3 bad versions of it. 3 bad versions of Joe gets hurt on the farm. And then maybe along the way you'll find, wait, actually number 2 is pretty good. So you'll just have that freedom to explore, but just make sure you're getting to the same endpoint. Otherwise, especially in collaborating, it's almost impossible to keep everyone on the same page. You have multiple people reading the drafts, like they expect you to execute on the outline that you've given them. And they could get confused or lose confidence in the movie if you don't do that. But for your own work, yeah, you have a little bit more of that leeway. Good questions. Thank you, Carmen. Any other questions before I kind of move into the jumping around the slideshow portion? Maybe not. All right. So I'm going to scroll up to what people mentioned at the beginning of class as things that they were working on in their own scripts so that I can kind of focus on those areas. So let's see. What did people mention? Tone. integrating B story, raising stakes in Act 2. Too many subplots, so a lot of plotting. Passive protagonists and characters. Pacing. I wrote, having trouble determining what we should include in action segments. Okay. Third act, a little too quick. Sounds like most people are struggling with pacing and plotting. Okay, let's start there in that case then. So, assessing problems in pacing and plotting. Let's skip ahead and move to a different slide. Here we go. Pacing, plot, and structure. So, a couple things to keep in mind going into this. Act 1 is the setup. Act 3 is the finale and the ending. But Act 2 is the movie. So we need to be making sure that the Act 1, and obviously when you're writing a TV show, Act 2 is the show. But you get the idea, right? So Act 2 is where the important things need to happen. It's longer than either the first or the third act. It's the longest section, the most substantial section. And it's where you need to be making sure that you are executing those basic promises that the reader had in mind, or making good on those promises that the reader had in mind, moving into this based on the title, logline, genre, imagine like the poster or something like that, right? The poster should reflect what we're doing in Act 2. We're looking for external dramatic conflict as that story's lifeblood to keep things moving forward in Act 2. In a series, we might look at the plot as a series of kind of intertwined bomb wicks that are all leading to different bombs that are going to lead to a series of explosions, each one that powers and supplements the next one until they get, chain reaction, boom, 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 all the way up into your biggest explosion of all, which is the finale, and then we wrap up pretty quickly after that. A lot of beginner scripts don't really tell a coherent story, and where they tend to significantly lag is the second act, where flat, saggy, soggy middle of the second act is one of the more common issues in scripts of people who are just starting at this. We may ask yourself this question: is the main character driving the story? Which is something that one of our commenters mentioned. My characters don't seem active enough. Well, you may need to go through your outline and start every scene card with main character's name. So if the scene starts with them, that is a helpful, just like a tool to remind you that this is about, remember, it's a person's story. This movie is a person's story, and each scene is going to be a mini story within that story that are all advancing your character through that story. And so in the same way that like a paragraph of a novel is intended to encompass a thought, and each sentence within that paragraph is supposed to build to that thought and make a case for that thought, scenes are sort of similar, right? Where each scene is a smaller story that is leading your character down this journey where they're eventually going to become this different person. They're changing over time, because movies are about the most important events in characters' lives and the ways that people change pretty drastically, as opposed to TV, which is about people usually changing more incrementally and gradually over time. So we have to ask, does each scene work on its own? Work on its own as in, is it just fun to watch? Does it have interesting lines of dialogue, interesting action, things like that? And also, does it propel the story forward? Does it follow your main character actually enacting a plan to overcome an obstacle and maybe trying several different ways if that initial plan fails, in what we might call a try-fail cycle in novel plotting? At a certain point, they're going to either succeed or fail at that task. That will push them closer to or further from their final goal, and they'll have some sort of emotional development from it as well. And it could be something very simple, like they're a little more annoyed after that scene, or it could be something more drastic. This is the part where they snap or something like that. So maybe just make a little checklist as you're going through your re-outline, and maybe you may need to assess, using just the basic rules of scene craft, is each scene doing exactly what it needs to do, and are we moving characters to their goals quickly enough? And so you may need to, first of all, break down your characters, in order to feel like lack of pacing is going to feel like a lack of progress, because we usually assess pacing through that lens of character progress. If it feels like nothing is happening in the movie, imagine like all these sort of boring, pretentious indie dramas that you've seen before, or maybe experimental films where there's a whole scene of just a bug flying through a field, and then there's just the clouds moving, and then there's just a rocking chair tilting back and forth, and then there's just some water dripping from an icicle or something like that. We're like, okay, these are interesting images, but what is changing? What is advancing? What choices are a character making that are going to have drastic impact on their life and move them closer to or further from their final goal? So low pacing is a result of your audience isn't feeling progress taking place, usually. So it could be that you need to break down your character's much larger goal into a series of smaller goals more distinctly, and you need to clarify their goals within scenes. because if the goal isn't clear within a scene, that it's not really going to be it's not going to be accessible whether or not the character is making progress towards accomplishing that thing. Your character might also just need more external kind of milestones towards their objectives, whereas if it feels like their goal is entirely internal in the first place, which is why I warn you so much to stay away from goals that can be summed up as something like your character must come to terms with something, or must understand something, or must discuss something. When must anyone discuss anything? Must implies urgency, right? So it could be that your character goals, their sort of mini objectives on the way towards their larger objective, are not clearly enough drawn. And that you may need to sort of just remind us what the stakes are and what exactly is changing in each part. Like, think of a war story. A war where your character needs to essentially just survive till the end of the war, right? Or let's say the goal is to win the war. Well, okay, in that case, we might see it could be easy in writing a war story just to give us a bunch of episodic situations where there's a problem of some kind. Like a tank attacks, and in this scene there's rats in the trench, and in this scene there's a bombing run, something like that. But it doesn't actually feel like your character's advancing or that the front is shifting at all, because you haven't actually defined what is the result of each of these moments, right? Like you may actually need to add a couple extra lines of dialogue or a little extra visualization to show that, you know, a tank is attacking and it's going to break through our main supply line. If it gets through there, our entire logistics are screwed and we're going to die out here. And then you will have some scenes where the characters are able to avoid those consequences, and some where the characters are actually suffering those consequences, and as a result, it feels like progress is being made. We're losing ground. Losing ground is still progress. So don't forget that. Don't forget that your character's losing is still progress being made. And, for instance, like, let's look at how the Battle of Helm's Deep plays out between the original animated Hobbit movie, or was not Hobbit, Lord of the Rings movie, versus the Oscar-winning 2002 Lord of the Rings movie. Well, mostly that it feels kind of like a boring slog in the cartoon, and it works brilliantly well in the new one. That's because those markers of progress are established in a crystal clear way. There's our wall. Don't let the enemy get through the wall. But if they do get through it, we have the second curtain wall, and we have the citadel we can fall back to. Anyway, the wall is our main line of defense. Wait a minute, there's a sewer grate or there's a small weak point in the wall. That bad guy has a bomb, and he's moving towards that weak point in the wall. Quick, shoot that bad guy. If they get through our gates, we're in huge trouble, because they'll have pierced the exterior of the citadel. They're going to threaten the women and children. We're going to be in huge trouble. Oh crap, your characters fail to stop the bomb guy. We lose huge progress. It's a huge blow to your characters, but we know exactly what it means. We know exactly what the stakes are, because we have all these amazing, of course, we are constantly reminded at every chance that there are, the old ladies and the children are huddling under the castle and are, like, terrified of all the noise going on upstairs. It's like, we know what is at risk. We know what the layers of defenses are. So the progress in Helm's Deep is a losing battle, right? Every time your characters are surviving a scene, or they, like, survive a skirmish or an engagement, but still we are able to track how much ground they have lost and what the actual shifting fronts of that war are. So it's just really going to probably come down to pacing problems, and lack of active protagonists are going to come down to you more clearly setting up what the goals are on a scene-by-scene basis, and making sure that we can understand how much progress your character is making towards those sub-objectives. Hope that makes sense. I'll also take follow-up questions on this idea of tracking progress to moderate pacing, if anyone has any. Looks like we may have some questions in the comments. Let me see. Confusion because the characters are responding, so they feel active. So this might be... So responsive characters are usually not going to be considered as active, but there are times when all you can do in a moment in the movie is have your characters respond. Like, let's look at a slasher movie, right? Well, until the slasher actually intrudes into your character's life, it's unlikely that they're going to be doing anything but responding, right? But once that sort of... that hill is crested and your character knows what the problem is, and they have to start putting in place some kind of plans to... It can be to do anything, to save themselves, to get help, to defeat the killer, whatever it is. Like, they can take any track there that they want, but we have to go from responding to being more active in order to feel like your character's actually in the driver's seat of that story. There's very few exceptions to this. There's the occasional movie that breaks this a little bit, but normally, your character can respond a little. They can be a bit responsive, but once, the best way of being responsive is by becoming active. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's see. Log lines have never been good with focus when it comes to them. Focus on the wrong things. I can come back to that in a second. Looks like we have a voice question, so feel free to keep typing out if you want to go more into logline stuff. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the point of like even horror, which gets criticized for not having like active protagonists, like reactive protagonists. In a lot of horror, they tend to turn sort of more towards action towards the end of the movie in order to have this kind of like, I guess, catharsis of the victim getting one over on the monster or the killer. And I just wanted to point out, like, that's, I guess, how do you, like, when it comes to horror, like, balance, I guess, the feeling that your character isn't doing enough when what they're doing is pretty much just running from, whatever's terrorizing them.
Right. So that's a good question. If your character's just trying to get away in every scene, how can we make them feel active and like they're making progress towards their goal? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of like I feel like No Country for Old Men did a similar thing.
Mm-hmm. So chase movies, basically, yeah. So having a ticking clock in place that actually is going to be one of the many mechanics you can use to add that sense of progress into a story, even in stories like this. So it's either we have to survive for this amount of time, right? That's what changes Evil Dead 2. That's the biggest difference between Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead 1, right? Which are both basically, we're trapped in the cabin being attacked by zombies and demons from outside the cabin and inside the cabin as well. But what is the hook, or not the hook, but the marketing tagline of Evil Dead 2, and also a line in the movie, Evil Dead 2, you'll be dead by dawn. You'll dead by dawn. It's like one of the best, like, it works as a tagline. It's also the ticking clock. We have to survive until dawn. So every scene, we have, like, just by continuing to survive, we make a little bit of progress. We can keep checking the clock throughout the movie, can't we? We can look at the clock and see, oh, we're just 1 more hour till dawn. Just 30 more minutes until dawn. Like, we can kind of use that to track where your characters are. When the sunlight starts to creep up over the hill, we start to, feel that sense of hope and like we're almost there. Just survive a little longer. So a ticking clock like that is going to be really useful. If it's going to be based on a character trying to escape from something, then think of all the other tracks that we can push them down. One, well, their physical exertion, especially in a chase-based story, it's like, well, when the character collapses, they're going to die, right? So that's one sense of progress, is going to be you have to succeed before you cannot fight any further. So that might be one thing you could do. It also might be that you need to give them checkpoints or some kind of, objective, like some place we're trying to reach. We're trying to get from here to there, and we have a map or whatever that we can track how close we are to that sort of thing. That's going to tell us, okay, we got to the police station. Now we have won. We have escaped. We are now free. So yeah, look at using ticking clocks to, and you may need to introduce a new one if you don't have enough of that sense of sort of urgency and also, clear, distinct progress towards a goal. If the whole thing feels like we're just running away and we're not able to track anything at all, then something's miscalibrated in your movie. But it may need to be that you have that added ticking clock, or maybe just look at the basics of, am I able to exact tolls on this character that feel cumulative? Am I losing a different friend in every scene, right? Like, we're just running from the killer, but this friend got killed in that scene. Another friend got killed in the next scene. That's a sense of progress, right? Or it might be, I took a cut to the back in that scene. I took a stab to the leg in that scene. Eventually, I'm not going to be able to keep fighting. That's also progress. So you may have to kind of impose that sense of progress on those stories by using those milestones and those ticking clocks to clarify it.
Thank you. Oh yeah, I was also wondering if you have seen the new Evil Dead yet.
No spoilers, please. I can't wait. It's like my favorite franchise, but I haven't seen
it.
Oh,
I'm just gonna say it's good.
Okay,
That's
okay.
all.
Thank you for that. All right, looks like Jade has a question. So I've invited you up. It says I'll have to use my mod powers to bring myself up because mobile. You're invited. So if you're able to do that, feel free. Go ahead.
I had to use my mod powers. Hello.
That's okay. Hi.
I guess to elaborate on my question, I guess I'm having, like, I I showed my log lines to my friend, right? So sometimes they say that your characters are all passive, and I'm like, well, that's okay, right? So the problem, I don't know if it's a problem because it's like when I picture responding, I picture like after this event happens to them, they start planning, they start doing this and that, instead of just being like, wow, can't believe that happened, I guess. So I'm like wondering, are they active or passive? And I don't really know what to do to make them. I feel like if I write them out, they'll be interesting. But I guess like if my logline doesn't make people want to watch it, then like what am I gonna do?
So does it feel like your inciting incident is just one distinct thing that happens, or does it feel like it's a series of situations? I guess would be maybe where that would be coming in.
I guess I picture like a distinct thing. Like picture like, I don't know, usually I make magical girl things. Picture like something invading and it's like, oh no, people are turning into monsters, because like, yeah, I showed you that one before. And like the main character usually, you know, when an active person sees all this going on, their best friend gets taken, they're like, oh no, now I have to act. And that's what like influences them to sort of start planning and doing this thing, because they're like, oh man, my friend.
Yeah, no, that feels perfectly active to me. I mean, in that case, like sometimes your characters need some kind of event to occur before they spring into action. Definitely, that's like just some inciting incident. Like that's what an inciting incident is. So in your case, that doesn't sound like your character would be too passive or reactive to me. It sounds like they would be using tactics to pursue a goal that has clear, tangible progress towards it, with milestones along the way, right?
Okay, good. Yeah, never listening to my friend again.
Yeah, I would just get rid of the whole friend, honestly.
Honestly, throw them all away.
Throw them in the trash. You don't need them. It's fine. No, just kidding. But no, to me that sounds fine. I just, in that specific case, I can't detect any problem with the passivity of the character.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I will go now.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Okay, thanks for the question.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Get me out.
Toilet flushing sound effects. Or should it be... I'm wondering what sound effect I should use for throwing people out of the audience. Should I have maybe a crowd surfing sound effect? Like we're hucking them back onto the crowd and then carrying them away? Something like that. Okay. Alright, so let me see if there were more questions. What about dumbing down a script with complex situations going on? I like complex scenes where I get to explore and find out things on my own along with the characters, as opposed to the characters explaining or the scenes being oversimplified. Do I have to determine the target audience for that? Example of good complex scenes: Inception, Arrival. Example of oversimplified: Da Vinci Code, Jurassic World. Okay, so I think we're referring to the note of is your audience just able to follow what's going on in the story? And if you're getting that note, if you're getting that response, I had trouble following what was happening, can you dumb it down? Well, we have to look at the problem, right? The note is I had trouble following what was happening. The prescriptive advice, I think you should dumb it down, will not necessarily be the answer, because readers are not always expert writers. They don't always have the solution to the problem. All they're good at doing sometimes is identifying that there is something off, that there is some kind of problem. And if the audience simply isn't understanding what's happening, it's not entirely on them unless they're reading it while they're playing on their phone or something, right? We have to assume that they're reading it and paying attention, and if a reasonable, average person is reading a script and paying attention and they can't follow what's happening, something's wrong. Definitely. So, that doesn't mean you have to dumb it down. That doesn't mean you need to have the characters explain everything. That doesn't mean that you need to have some really easy-to-follow text that comes up on the screen and tells you exactly what is occurring. But it may indicate that you need to have more setup for that moment earlier on in the story, so that we know what the rules are, and maybe think of all the Christopher Nolan movies. They'll almost always have a moment early on in the story where the character will explain a bigger concept in a smaller way. That may be something to look at doing as well. It's not really dumbing it down. It's just you may have a character that need to understand something. Maybe they aren't an expert, so somebody, what is it? It's always you don't know what a wormhole is? Well, let me show you. And they take a piece of paper and they fold it like this, and then they stick a pencil through the piece of paper, and they're like, this is space-time, right? I feel like we've seen that scene 10 billion times. But you see why it's there, right? It's similar to when you play a video game. Imagine we're playing a VR game, right? Early on in the game, they give you a Nerf gun, a Nerf dart gun. They're like, here, shoot the targets with the Nerf gun. And then you get to try that out and, use the gun controls in a smaller context that doesn't actually have all the intensity of the combat. Then later on, you get a real gun, and they're like, oh no, bad guys, shoot the bad guys, right? So think of it in a similar way. where you may need to explain the concepts of these very, if later scenes are going to hinge on very complex concepts, then having a demonstration of that concept early on in the story, not demonstration of, we don't need to do the Nolan thing of having an expert character literally explain it, but we see a smaller version of that thing working as it's intended to early on, so we have a full understanding of that rule by the time we get to the place where that rule matters. Because, like, similar to in the laws of magic and storytelling, it's like when your audience's ability to accept a plot element as congruent and necessary to the story kind of hinges on their ability to understand that thing, right? So you're not going to, if they aren't understanding that something's clearly wrong, and you have to just assess why that is. It may be that the rule itself hasn't come up enough, and maybe because there haven't been a clear enough use of this same principle beforehand, and maybe that you could be helped out by having this kind of Watson character that needs to figure things out as they go, or even just having a character that they themselves do not understand what's going on. They're like, can someone explain this to me? Even if they don't get that explanation, the audience will feel a little better because they're like, okay, I'm not the only one here who has no idea what's happening. Like, clearly, this is a complex idea even within the world. I don't feel confused. I feel like I'm on board with whoever that person is. So, like, Woody Harrelson's character in True Detective is a great example of this sort of character, where he may not be on solving the mystery on the same level as Rust, but he's kind of the audience surrogate, and that we're only supposed to be about as smart as him. But there can be other characters that are supposed to be smarter than the audience. It just makes it a little easier that way. Okay, hopefully that helps with that question. What else? So I can feel free to either keep asking. We have like 20 minutes left, so we can just open the floor to whatever other plot, or not necessarily just plot, but all just rewriting questions or areas that you want to know how to improve on in your script and fixing and rewriting that script. Or I can just scroll back up in our chat and see what some of those things were that people mentioned earlier. Thanks, Jay. Hope that's helpful. And in chat, Lee says, Prospect does this beautifully. All the setup serves as 3 different purposes, so it doesn't feel like a tutorial. It's just entertaining. Yeah, those sort of tutorial sections can be really, really fun if you pull them off right. They don't have to feel annoying. Although the thought of a tutorial sounds boring, but I always like the tutorial. Maybe I'm crazy. Okay. So let's go to, let me scroll up here and see what else people mentioned. So this was on plotting and pacing, so we covered that. I saw a little bit about tone. And was there anything else that I wanted to cover? Let's see. We had, a very loud plane flying right outside there too. Tone, and then B-story and stakes. Okay, that might be enough topics. Can I talk? Lee has a question in the chat. Can I talk about categorizing feedback? Sure. So when you are making this sort of notes document, you can sort of organize the feedback however you want. What I usually recommend, though, is you just kind of collect it all and then organize it chronologically from beginning to end. And that's going to be, like, just require you to just highlight each note and move it up or move it down depending on when that thing occurs in the script. It just makes it much easier to move those notes then into your copy of your re-outline, which should have your full set of new scene cards, so that should be in chronological order, and you should very easily be able to then just tell where everything would go. So I find it handy just I know it's kind of simple, but just chronologically. But some other suggestions, you might start with big notes, like the biggest things up top, and then at the very bottom have the smallest changes like typos, grammar, or problems like that, which are pretty, just a quick couple keystrokes in order to adjust. But you might at the very top start with things like, the tone doesn't work, this isn't funny. That might be your first big note at the very top. And then underneath that, maybe you have like, this character isn't working, cut this central relationship and completely rethink it. So you might want to try, if the chronological version doesn't work, maybe start with biggest issue down. And then last, you might, if neither of those work for you, then maybe you'll want to adjust it by category of the type of adjustment that it is. So dialogue, character, pacing, any of those just sort of ways. But chronologically, I think is just kind of very clean and simple. Paul suggests a class in decoding what the feedback might actually mean. Oof, that's called being a writer, bro. That's like, that class would be called like Writerness 101. Writerness? Clearly, even my brain is on strike right now. Look at that. Yeah, that's one of the note behind the note, assessing the note behind the note. Maybe we could do a class on notes at some point. Okay, so let me scroll up. Okay, so I think I had a few questions that I saw before, so maybe I'll just scroll through until I find. I have a little to mention on tone, and not much on dialogue. I have a lot of slides on dialogue, but not too much. Something about somebody mentioned, what was it? We have B stories and subplots, and we have tone. Okay, yeah, let's try to focus on those for the rest of our time. Okay, we'll start with tone. I do have that slide, don't I? Oh, maybe I don't. Okay, so I'm just gonna have to talk off the cuff for tone, but let me go into this. So, tone is mostly that you're creating the wrong emotion that you are trying to create. If there are tone problems, it could be because you've promised that this thing is supposed to be funny and it's just not. So the problem could be that you've made the wrong promises to begin with, and that you may need to go back to your genre, your logline, and your comps and adjust those so that you are setting the correct promises. If people are like, this wasn't funny at all, but it wasn't even supposed to be funny, then something's way, way off and you're kind of out in outer space there, so just be careful with that one. But in any case, so tone means you're creating the wrong emotion or the wrong, emotional experience with the work. And that's going to come down to a couple things. It might come down to voice on the page. If your voice itself on the page is creating the wrong emotional tone, you've just picked the wrong words or the wrong point of view or the wrong kind of angle on what's happening. You can write a very dark kind of horror comedy and have it feel like the script is kind of making fun of the characters and laughing at their poor fortune and their deaths. And if you're writing a kind of Tales from the Crypt or Creepshow kind of story, that can kind of be a big part of the fun. But if we aren't properly keyed into that, if it doesn't feel like one of those stories, then it might feel sort of weird if in your very dark and serious story it feels like the author's sort of making fun of the characters for dying, right? So it may be that you just haven't calibrated that. It's almost always going to come down to you haven't calibrated that audience's experience or that the readership's experience properly. You haven't allowed them to get ready for the right type of ride. And then when they're on that ride, they're like, this ride feels wrong. What else can we do? Funny versus serious is always just going to be a big part of the tone. So you may just need to pull back on attempted jokes. If it feels like your jokes aren't working, then you may need to stop attempting to write so many jokes. You might find that your best humor is coming from something else, like natural situations or kind of funny little moments that the characters end up in without actually trying to write sitcom-style jokes. So you may need to just sort of like pull back a little bit on the cleverness or the wittiness of the dialogue and make it feel a little bit less written and try for a more naturalistic angle. Try just having less dialogue if it feels like your jokes are falling flat. Or you didn't intend them to be jokes in the first place. And then last, if your script is kind of coming off too funny, or like it seems like you're going for comedy when it doesn't feel appropriate to that story, it could be, or I guess I did kind of just cover this idea, didn't I? But I would, I guess now I should mention, what if it needs to be funnier? Then you need to, I find it useful, go highlight every place on the page that you want an audience to laugh. Imagine there's sort of a laugh track in the background if you need to make something funnier, and obviously your story may not have a laugh track in its final version, but just highlight all the places that an average audience would ideally laugh. And I found by just doing this, you can kind of assess like how many attempts at a laugh you're going for per page, and it may be that there aren't enough. You should in like different types of comedy have different sort of density of jokes. In a Tina Fey script, you're going to get like 4 or 5 per page, and if there's not, then something's off in that style of writing. But it could be that in your particular style, you have maybe 1 laugh per page or something like that. But just try to be like, in order to create that sense of consistency, then if your script is a comedy, there should be laughs all throughout the entire movie. We're never going to lose points for having an audience laugh at a scene or a moment in a comedy, unless it totally undercuts something else in the narrative. So try going through to that highlighting method, just assess, these are the moments we're supposed to laugh, and then if during your readings, and if your readers mention, like, I thought that was not funny, or I was wondering where the jokes were, or something like that, it could be that you just need to try more. You just need to attempt more of those moments that you would highlight per page. But if it feels like there just aren't enough highlights on every page, you probably just need to try more funny things. I know it sounds a little silly to say, just be funny if you want to be funny, but like making it very quantified, like just adding the highlight and just saying this is a laugh moment is just, I find, a useful trick to kind of force yourself to say, okay, what is the, and if you don't know, that's also a problem. So try to really determine. Imagine you're in a theater with the audience. Ask, what do I hope that people are laughing at? And don't say every single line. Lee mentioned 30 Rock. Yeah, 30 Rock might have the highest joke density of any show. So that's just some suggestions on tone, humor versus seriousness, and just little tools that you can use to try to address that. Let me see if I had one on subplots. I had so many on dialogue. I guess maybe I did not have a subplot slide. Okay, that's okay. Off the cuff again. So in terms of subplots, I'm just going to leave a couple of these slides up in the background just so you guys can be seeing the text for this, or you can review the slides later on your own. Okay, so I'm just going to slowly flip through these slides so you can kind of just look at some suggestions on things like overwriting, which we didn't really get to. Okay, so subplots, integrating your B story. So your B story most often is going to blossom from your, or very organically from your A story, because it will start with your main character maybe bumping into someone else that then we will follow on their own sort of little adventure. Maybe they'll come back and meet up with your character at some point. That's how it might work if you have just a B story. Or if you're doing an ensemble or a TV show with lots of characters, then maybe you have an A, a B, and a C, which all start at different places but actually need to then converge. So I would suggest not taking us much past the halfway mark without having it become very evident how those stories are going to connect with each other. Around the halfway mark, we should not be wondering, wait, where are we going with this? What is that story all about? What does that have anything to do with what's going on in our A story? Usually that will not work. There's occasional exceptions to, reasons that you might want to keep the audience really guessing as to how this is relevant or what we're watching. Like, why are we showing this side story of this seemingly unrelated thing? But try this tactic with your subplots. If you consider that all of them are going to be branching off of the A story, consider that every subplot scene should either, and you don't have to always do this, but this just works well for me. If every scene either starts connected to the A story or ends connected to the A story, then you're going to always ensure that you're sort of, although there will be deviations, they will always be meeting back up with the A story. So, and that, when I say meeting back up, what could that mean? Well, let's say this starts with your main character and his best friend are walking through town, heading to the arcade, and then they get separated. So now your B story has gone off in a separate direction. Maybe eventually we come and rejoin that character. And then you can either start that scene with their connection to the A story, so it starts with them on the phone with their friend, like, where are you, dude? And then they end somewhere else, or it could end with the A story, meaning more like they start wandering around, they're kind of lost, and by the end of this, they get in a car with a stranger, they're like, I should really call my friend, and they call the friend at the end of that scene. So if you make sure to either start or end your subplot scenes by connecting them in some way to the A story, then you're going to avoid them drifting too far and avoiding, losing that sense of focus for those scenes. Just a handy tactic I recommend for ensemble-style storytelling. Okay, we have a few questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get to all of these. What about flashback scenes? The frequency of them throughout the film and the effects of it on the character of the character. Like just jumping in with the character in a certain state, but flashbacks describing what happened. I feel that on one hand, we get to discover along with the character and start on a base character, but with a setup, it's more of a cohesive story structure and more comfortable. Recommendations for the usage of flashback scenes and how frequently they should be used and what to avoid. Okay, sure, good question. We get this question all the time. Flashbacks, how many of them should we have? To what extent should I lean on them or use them? As little as possible is the answer. And as little as possible for some stories might be, a substantial amount. And in some stories where the entire structure revolves around multiple timelines, then it may be there are lots of flashbacks throughout the movie. But only if that is sort of a key component of that storytelling style would I really rely on this. If that's not a big part of your sort of goals for the movie, if one of your goals is not to weave together a dense tapestry of different timelines, then I would probably not have a lot of flashbacks in your movie. Maybe one or two, I guess. There's not like a hard and fast rule. It just is something that is often going to feel like it's detracting from the momentum of the story that we could be following a little more linearly. Like the more linear beginning, middle, and end, A to B to C you can get with the story, the better off you will be. you want to generally, as a newer writer especially, avoid over-reliance on flashbacks to fill in gaps in information that you could have otherwise layered into the scenes in a more sequential, straightforward version of those events. So I realize this is kind of a vague answer, but it's like not very many flashbacks. You want to avoid them where you can. It's something will almost always feel like it preserves the momentum a little better if it occurs within the kind of narrative of what we're doing, or like within the current moment of what we're doing. But there's always exceptions. There's always like the occasional absolute banger of a flashback that you're like, okay, well, that's clearly why they're there. They work really well for some stuff. Often, if that thing that we're flashing back to is a big reveal, that actually creates more momentum that we can springboard out of, rather than dragging the story to a halt and feeling like, okay, this is something, nobody was really wondering the answer to this question, but here's this info, and now you need that info moving forward. It should be as exciting as a scene that would have played out sequentially next would have been. So anyway, I hope that kind of answers that a little bit. Stay away from flashbacks where you can. They are often a crutch for storytelling that has not properly layered in the information that we need. Okay, let's see. Do we have other questions? Looks like we have 5 minutes now, so I'm just going to open the floor to questions on anything we've talked about today, revision, rewriting, or maybe just screenwriting craft techniques in general, or anything about Script Camp. What else would you guys like to know in our last few minutes here? Anything else I can still get to? Keep in mind we do also, for members, we have lab coming up on Saturday from 4 to 6 every Saturday. You can come with up to 5 pages of anything you're working on for feedback, or you can bring questions and topics that you'd like to simply hear more about. Let's see, in our, I'm just going to leave it on a different slide so you guys can just read some more helpful principles. We have questions and comments in the chat. Lee says, The Good Place uses flashbacks really well because of its premise. It makes sense as a viewer to get glimpses of their former lives. Yeah, also just given the setup of the world in Good Place, the characters can't ever leave the world that they're in and go back to their normal lives, so it's sort of the only way that we would get any glance of what's happening on Earth. At least, I've only seen the first season, so I'm not sure what happens later, but in the first season, they're in the afterlife, so we need flashbacks to get a sense of who they used to be. Let's see. Jay says, more like it feels right, but the flashback and structure feels experimental. Feedback would be the way to know more. Okay, we were responding to somebody else there, it looks like. Dan says, what denotes a sloppy flashback as a crutch? Well, I'm going to say if it feels like we're only doing the flashback, we're only flashing back in order to get a piece of information that we could have gotten somewhere else or some other way, then that might feel just like an unnecessary scene. If it feels like the flashback is not sort of moving the story forward, which it needs to ultimately be, and it's tricky to give us information from the past that also moves the story forward. But it might be, you might find other ways to just allow that revelation to happen more in the moment with your character, or if it's like your character themselves realizing something and that revelation or that flashback is like a big clue moving forward, that can be a helpful way to just make it feel really relevant and urgent that they get this information now. It shouldn't feel like information we could have gotten at any time, because if it does, then it's like, well, why didn't we just get this earlier in the movie then? So it should feel like information that could only have come right then as a requisite for, you know, our momentum moving forward. It should feel like a springboard that actually builds that momentum rather than detracts from it. Good questions. Looks like we're running down on time, so check our chat for that poll. You can see that little list of blue numbers there that if you intend to sign up, you can click that number 1. That will give you instant access to all of our member-exclusive channels, and it will flag that you are interested in signing up for your free trial soon. Free trial lasts 2 weeks and gives you access to every single class, event, bootcamp, workshop, lab, every single thing we do, over 100 hours of stuff to do with events happening on every single day of the week here on Script Camp and WordCamp, with our new servers being upgraded and added to all the time. We have different classes and different topics, and if you'd like to actually volunteer to teach a class or topic, you can do so by messaging me or Nacho, our co-founder. We want to show you guys what we have coming up, so I'm just going to leave you on our list of upcoming free classes. And remember that these new bootcamp sessions are getting started now, so if you want to learn how to write a brand new feature, start to finish, it's like how to write a movie 101. You're going to write a movie in 8 weeks, It's going to be this Sunday, May 7th from 10 to noon Pacific time. Feature Bootcamp Week 1 free class. All right, that's going to be it for today, folks. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope this was a useful look at the strategies that go into rewriting. And hope this helps you moving forward. We have plenty of events coming up. We have class tomorrow, 6 to 8. We have Pilot Bootcamp. I think we're going into week 3. So anyone who's still in that, we'd be glad to see you guys there. Yeah, week 3 tomorrow at 6. We also have Sci-Fi Writers Group tomorrow at 4. Genre Writers Group tomorrow at 1. Plenty of different things. Check the Events tab. If you scroll to the very top of the chat channels on Discord, you'll see a little tab that says 80 events. You can click on that and also indicate any events that you're interested in by clicking the bell, and that will give you a notification before that event starts. Go ahead, Nacho. Oh, he muted himself. Nacho, did you want to share something? Maybe not. Maybe he stepped away. That's okay. Thanks for coming by, folks. We'll hope to see you soon at your next script camp, class, or event. Have a great night, everyone.